It started with whispers. At first, the Beckett family thought it was just the house settling, the kind of sounds any grand estate makes when the wind shifts, when the walls breathe in the silence of the night. But Neverland Ranch wasn't just any house. It had a history that stretched beyond the living, woven with the legacy of a man who had once been its king. When Mark and Lillian Beckett purchased the sprawling property in 2023, they saw it as an opportunity to breathe new life into a place long abandoned. The ranch had stood empty for years, its gates rusted, the gardens overgrown, the fountains cracked and dry. They envisioned a boutique retreat, a luxury hideaway for those seeking a piece of pop culture history. Their two children, 9-year-old Emma and 12-year-old Jacob, were less convinced. The unease began subtly, soft music playing from nowhere, footsteps on the second floor when no one was there, doors found ajar after being firmly locked. But it was Emma who first saw him. One evening, while exploring the old dance studio in the East Wing, she noticed movement in the mirror's reflection, a shadow, gliding with effortless grace. She turned, expecting to see her brother. But she was alone. Only the fading echo of a single spin, as if someone had just completed a perfect pirouette, remained. Mark dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Lillian, however, couldn't ignore the way the lights flickered at the stroke of midnight, the way the old gramophone in the sitting room would sometimes hum the opening notes of Billie Jean without warning. She began researching, reading every account of the ranch's past. She learned of the people who had worked there, the fans who had broken past the gates just for a glimpse, the stories of Michael himself wandering the halls late into the night, unable to sleep, lost in his own music. Then came the voice. Jacob, ever the skeptic, had been sneaking into the main house after dark, hoping to capture proof that his sister was making things up. He carried his phone, ready to record. That night, as he whispered to himself, mocking the very idea of ghosts, he heard it soft, breathy, unmistakable. "Do you believe now?" He ran. In the weeks that followed, the presence became undeniable. Shadows slid across the moonlit hallways. The grand piano in the parlor played a single note when no one was near. The most chilling event occurred in Emma's bedroom. One night, she woke to find her posters rearranged, the drawings she had left on her desk replaced with a message scribbled in perfect, looping handwriting. Love lives forever. The Becketts never felt threatened, but the weight of the presence was too much to bear. Lillian began leaving candles burning at night, whispering soft goodbyes to empty rooms. Mark stopped working in the house after dark. The children no longer wandered alone. By the end of the year, the family made a quiet decision to leave. Neverland was never meant to be just another estate. It had belonged to someone whose spirit, whether in life or in death, refused to fade. As they drove away for the last time, Emma swore she saw a figure standing on the balcony, a silhouette framed by the moonlight, a fedora tilted downward, the faintest shimmer of a glove catching the night. And then he was gone. The car rumbled down the long driveway, its tires crunching over the gravel. But inside the vehicle, the Beckett family remained silent. Lillian kept her hands clenched around the steering wheel, her knuckles pale against the leather, while Mark sat stiffly beside her, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. In the back seat, Emma pressed her forehead against the window, her breath leaving small clouds of condensation on the cold glass. She did not blink. Not yet. Not while the house was still visible in the rearview mirror. Through the wrought iron gates, past the grand oak trees that lined the entrance, Neverland stood as it always had, beautiful, lonely, waiting. The glow from the upstairs window had not yet dimmed. The silhouette on the balcony remained, perfectly still, watching. And then, just as the car turned the final bend in the road, it vanished into the darkness. The moment the house was out of sight, Emma exhaled, a slow and trembling breath. She had seen him. She wanted to tell Jacob, to whisper what she knew, to ask if he had seen it too. But her brother sat with his head bowed, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tightly that she could see the muscle twitch just below his ear. He wouldn't want to talk about it. Not now. Maybe not ever. The night stretched long ahead of them, the roads winding endlessly under the moon's pale gaze. Trees blurred together, shadows slipping between their trunks like whispers of something unseen. The headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, but even inside the car, with the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of a loose window, there was no escaping the feeling that something had followed them. Lillian turned the radio on. The static hissed before settling on an old station, soft piano notes drifting through the speakers. It was a song she hadn't heard in years, a melody too familiar to be coincidence. Mark tensed beside her. His fingers tapped against his knee, out of rhythm, offbeat. Emma felt it too, that slow, creeping sensation of something just out of reach, of invisible eyes lingering in the quiet corners of the world. She swallowed hard and turned away from the window, curling her legs up onto the seat. She told herself that it was over, that the house was behind them, that they had left whatever haunted it in the place it belonged. But somewhere, far behind them, the house still stood, and something inside it had not yet let them go. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The road stretched endlessly beneath them, a dark ribbon twisting through the California hills. The world beyond the windows was silent, save for the occasional flicker of headlights on the highway, distant and fleeting, like lost souls passing in the night. Inside the car, the air was thick, suffocating in its quiet. No one spoke. No one dared. Lillian's hands remained tight on the steering wheel, her fingers curled like iron around the smooth leather. She hadn't looked at Mark in nearly an hour, but she could feel the tension radiating from him, see the way his shoulders had stiffened, the way his jaw stayed locked, as if he were holding back something he didn't dare put into words. The radio still played, though she had never touched the dial. The music swayed in and out of clarity, fading into static only to return with an eerie persistence. A voice, soft and distant, whispered through the speakers, not words, not lyrics, but something more unsettling. A breath, a sigh, presence. Jacob shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the glow of his phone casting pale light onto his face. He wasn't watching anything, wasn't scrolling, just staring at the blank screen, his reflection flickering in the glass. Emma watched him, her own arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She wanted to say something, to ask him if he had seen what she had seen, if he had felt it too, that heavy, lingering weight in the air, as though the house was still breathing around them. She thought of the balcony, of the figure standing there, watching. She had seen the tilt of the fedora, the shimmer of light against a single glove, the way the shadow had been too perfect, too defined to be a trick of the moonlight. She wanted to believe it had been a trick. But then why did she still feel his eyes on her? A bump in the road jolted them all, and for a brief moment, Mark let out a breath, sharp, sudden, like he had been holding it in for too long. Lillian flinched, her grip tightening on the wheel. Then the music changed. The static cleared, giving way to a song so instantly recognizable, so impossibly placed in that moment, that all four of them stiffened at once. Another day has gone. I'm still all alone. How could this be? You're not here with me. Lillian's knuckles went white. Mark reached for the dial, twisting it violently, but the song remained. The volume didn't lower. The station didn't change. The voice, smooth, soft, filled with sorrow, carried on, seeping into the space between them like a ghost itself. Jacob let out a curse under his breath and threw his phone onto the seat beside him. Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight. The road stretched forward, endless, empty. And behind them, far in the distance, something still lingered in the house they had left behind. Watching, waiting, the music played on. Lillian's hands trembled on the steering wheel, her nails digging into the leather as if the sensation could ground her. But the road before them was unreal, stretching endlessly in the beams of the headlights, the trees pressing in on either side, their skeletal branches reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. The night had swallowed everything else, no streetlights, no signs, no other cars, as if they were driving through a forgotten place that no longer belonged to the world of the living. Mark twisted the radio dial frantically, his breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. Static hissed and crackled, but no matter how he turned the knob, the song continued, unbroken. You never said goodbye. Someone tell me why. Did you have to go and leave my world so cold? Emma's fingers curled into her sleeves. The melody filled the car like a presence, its sorrow wrapping around them, seeping into the very air they breathed. She could feel it pressing against her chest, a weight that settled deep inside, familiar yet unbearable. Jacob's voice cut through the thick silence. Turn it off. Just turn it off. Mark's hands moved instinctively to the console, pressing the power button with force. Nothing happened. He pressed again, harder. The song remained. Jesus Christ, he muttered, yanking at the volume knob, but the sound did not waver. It was inside the car now, inside them, resonating through their bones, an echo of something unfinished. Emma's breathing quickened. Dad, she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Jacob slammed his fist against the door. Make it stop. Then, without warning, the radio cut to silence. The car was plunged into a void so sudden, so complete, that for a moment, the absence of sound was worse than the music itself. The hum of the engine seemed distant, unreal, as if they were no longer moving, no longer inside something tangible. Lillian exhaled, a slow, shaking breath, her grip still locked on the wheel. It's over, she whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it true. But Emma knew it wasn't, because in the silence, in the thick, endless quiet that had swallowed them whole, something else had taken its place. Faint rustling, a breath just behind her ear, and then, a voice, soft, lingering, barely more than a whisper. You are not alone. Emma's scream shattered the stillness. The car jerked violently as Lillian swerved, the tires screeching against the pavement. Mark shouted something incoherent, reaching out, but the motion was too sudden, too fast. The headlights caught something, a glimpse of movement, a flash of white against the darkness just for a second, before the car veered off the road. The world spun. A crash. Then, nothing. Only silence. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound. No sensation, just a vast and formless emptiness, stretching in all directions like a dream without edges. Then, slowly, the world crept back in. The first thing Emma registered was the distant ticking of the engine, cooling in the night air. The second was the scent, something sharp, metallic. Gasoline. Earth. The raw, damp scent of broken leaves crushed beneath the weight of the car. She opened her eyes. The headlights still burned, their beams angled strangely, illuminating a tangle of gnarled branches and wild grass. The car had come to rest at the bottom of a shallow ditch, its front bumper partially buried in the soft earth. Everything was still. The air, the trees, even the wind. It was as if the world had stopped moving. Emma blinked, her mind sluggish, her thoughts tangled. Her head throbbed. She reached up instinctively, her fingers brushing against her forehead. Wet, warm, sticky, blood. The groan of shifting metal snapped her fully awake. Lillian Mark's voice, hoarse, raw. Emma turned her head, wincing as pain lanced through her temple. Her mother sat slumped forward, her hands still gripping the wheel, her breath coming in slow, shallow gasps. Beside her, Mark was moving, already reaching over to check on her. Mom, Emma croaked, her throat dry. Mom, wake up. Lillian stirred, a soft, pained sound escaping her lips before she blinked, her gaze unfocused. I what? Jacob. Emma twisted around. Her brother was slumped against the window, his seatbelt the only thing keeping him upright. A thin stream of blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow, but as Emma reached out, his eyes fluttered open. Jake, she whispered. Are you okay? He blinked, dazed, then let out a breath. Yeah, he muttered. Yeah, I think so. Outside, the night pressed in around them, thick and unyielding. The trees loomed high above, their tangled limbs casting skeletal shadows across the ground. The road was barely visible from where they had crashed, a dark ribbon winding through the wilderness. Mark exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. We need to get out of here. Lillian nodded weakly, unbuckling her seatbelt with shaking fingers. The car, it's not safe. I smell gas. Emma reached for her own belt, her hands fumbling against the latch. The buckle clicked, and she shifted forward, pushing the door open. The air outside was cool against her skin, but there was something else beneath it, a strange stillness, an unnatural quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of passing cars, just silence. Jacob climbed out after her, rubbing his forehead with a wince. "That was insane," he muttered. "What the hell happened? Did we hit something?" Mark stepped around the car, his phone already in his hand. "I don't know," he admitted, tapping at the screen. No signal. Lillian glanced back at the road, her expression tight. "We should head up there. Someone might pass by." Emma wasn't listening. She was staring into the trees. Something had moved, just beyond the reach of the headlights, where the shadows thickened and the darkness took shape. A figure, tall, still, watching. Her breath caught. The fedora, the silhouette, the impossible familiarity of it. "Emma?" Jacob's voice snapped her out of her trance. She turned sharply, her heart pounding. The figure was gone. Had it ever been there? A chill ran down her spine, but she said nothing. The others were already moving toward the road, their footsteps crunching through the dry grass. Emma lingered for only a second longer, her gaze scanning the darkness one last time. Then, she turned and followed. Behind her, in the quiet hush of the night, the air stirred. A whisper, soft, barely audible. "You can't leave." The whisper clung to the night air, stretching between the trees, pressing against the base of Emma's skull like a memory she was never meant to recall. Her breath hitched, her steps faltering just for a moment. The others moved ahead, unaware, their forms shifting in and out of the pale glow of the headlights as they climbed the small incline toward the road. She swallowed, forcing herself to keep moving. The earth was soft beneath her sneakers, damp with dew, as if it had rained, though she knew the night had been dry. The smell of gasoline lingered, sharp and acrid, mixing with the scent of crushed leaves and something older, something she couldn't name. Mark was the first to reach the edge of the road. He turned, his silhouette dark against the pale, winding strip of asphalt. "We need to flag someone down," he said, glancing at the empty road in both directions. "Let's just wait here and—" The headlights cut out. Darkness swallowed them whole. Emma gasped, instinctively reaching for Jacob beside her. He stiffened, his fingers locking around her wrist. Lillian sucked in a sharp breath, her outline barely visible against the black void that had consumed the trees. The only remaining light came from Mark's phone, its dim glow reflecting off his face, his expression tight, unreadable. "That's not possible," he murmured, staring back at the car. The battery. Then came the music. Not from the car. Not from a speaker. From the trees. Soft, drifting, almost distant at first. A slow, rhythmic beat. The faintest echo of something impossibly familiar. A piano, delicate and sorrowful, weaving its way through the silence. Lillian's breath hitched. "No," she whispered. Mark turned in a slow circle, the phone's light trembling in his grip. "Where is that coming from?" Emma didn't speak. She couldn't, because she knew the song. She had heard it play in the car before everything had gone wrong, had heard it slip through the walls of Neverland when no one else was there, had felt its presence wrap around her in the quiet moments when she was alone. "Hold me, like the river Jordan, and I will then say to thee, you are my friend." The voice was soft, gentle, unmistakable. Jacob took a step back, his hand tightening on Emma's wrist. "No," he muttered. "No, no, no. This isn't happening." Then the lights came back. Not the headlights. The trees. Small orbs, pale as moonlight, flickered between the branches, swaying in a slow, rhythmic motion, like candle flames caught in an unseen breeze. They drifted higher, spinning, circling, their glow intensifying as the music swelled. Emma's pulse hammered against her ribs. She wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to move, but her feet wouldn't obey. Mark stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "Stay together. Don't." The words died on his lips, because something was moving beyond the trees. A shadow, gliding, smooth, effortless, as if it had no need for footsteps. The music swelled, the orbs flickering wildly, spinning faster, casting long, shifting shadows against the trunks. The figure emerged slowly, stepping just beyond the tree line, where the moonlight caught the edge of its shape. A hat tilted downward, a single glittering glove. The shape stood there, silent, unmoving, watching. Lillian made a sound, a choked, broken thing, half a sob, half a whisper. Jacob let go of Emma's wrist. The figure raised its head. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Then, the whisper came again, sliding through the trees, curling around them like smoke. You came back. The orbs burst apart, scattering like fireflies. And then, everything went dark. The darkness swallowed them. Thick, impenetrable, absolute. Emma could hear her own breathing shallow, trembling as she reached blindly through the void. Jacob was no longer beside her. The ground felt unsteady beneath her feet, as though the earth itself had loosened its grip on reality. Then a sound. Footsteps. Not frantic, not hurried, measured. Precise. The rhythmic tap of shoes against unseen pavement, deliberate as a heartbeat. The same sound that had once echoed through Neverland's halls, that had carried across its vast and empty rooms long after their owner had been laid to rest. A slow, familiar beat followed. Tap, 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 tap. Emma squeezed her eyes shut. No, this isn't real. But it was, because she could feel it now, not just the sound, but the weight of a presence, pressing in from all sides. It was not menacing, not angry, just there. A force beyond time, beyond reason. A whisper of something unfinished. The music had not stopped. It rose from the silence, soft and sorrowful, weaving itself around them, pulling at something deep within their chests. Lillian let out a broken sob. Then light. Not the harsh glare of headlights, nor the flicker of orbs, but something softer, warmer. A pale glow rising from the mist that had begun to coil around them, shaping itself into the illusion of something familiar. A garden. Not the roadside ditch where they had crashed. Not the dark, lonely highway, but Neverland. The grass beneath their feet was damp with morning dew. The carousel stood in the distance, its paint peeling, its horses frozen mid-gallop. The sound of laughter distant, ghostly drifted through the air, mixing with the music, a memory replaying itself long after the world had moved on. Emma turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The figure stood just ahead. Not a shadow now, not a silhouette lost in the trees, but something more real, more human. The fedora tilted just slightly. The single glove shimmered. And then he moved, a step forward, a shift of weight, the gentle, effortless glide of feet across invisible ground. The movement so unmistakable, so deeply embedded in the fabric of history, that Emma felt her knees go weak. He raised a hand, not in warning, not in threat, in farewell. The music swelled one last time, wrapping around them like a breath of wind. The lights flickered, the garden shimmered, and then, like a mirage in the desert, it was gone. They were standing on the roadside once more. The car, battered but intact, sat in the ditch. The sky was lighter now, dawn creeping over the horizon, painting the world in soft, golden hues. The trees stood still, silent once more, as if nothing had ever disturbed them. Lillian exhaled shakily, rubbing her hands over her face. Mark looked down at his phone. Signal restored. Jacob was pale, staring at the empty road. Emma turned back one last time. The house was gone. Not just out of sight, gone. No longer standing in the distance, no longer part of the landscape. As if Neverland had never been there at all. The wind stirred, carrying a final whisper through the trees. You are not alone. Then silence. And this time it was over. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.